They went to the queen to tell her subject had no bread. Do you know what she said?
Let them eat cake.
Who took the bomb?
We're getting screwed, man. Every time we turn around, we're getting screwed. Oh, the revolution's going to be through podcasting for sure. That's the only way we talk. It's the little guys that take the brunt of everything. It's got to stop. Peasants, man. We're just peasants. Every one of us. You watch those old movies, you see the peasants in the background with the kings and queens walking around. We're those people. We're those people. That. Do I have sound now? 5x5? You got me? Do you have sound now? Sound, check. I'm hoping that did it. Check on sound. Yes, all right, perfect. Thank you so much. Marizo, yes. Ferrejo, 5x5, good. We are all good this morning. Okay, so what I was saying was I am back in town, back in the Pacific Northwest. It is sure good to be home. This last week, I feel like I've just been dealing with nothing but extreme weather. I went to Wisconsin and spent some time out there, and they were having the coldest snap that they've had in a decade or long time. It was negative 18 degrees at one point on the car thermometer. That is really cold. And of course, lots of snow on the ground and stuff like that. And then after I got done with my business in Wisconsin doing a birthright screening, welcome anybody who's joining us from that audience. I'm glad to have you here. And then I headed east, headed down across Illinois and got to drive through Chicago. I'll reflect a little bit maybe later on my thoughts of driving through Chicago because I ended up kind of diverting and going into some of the side roads and things like that. And then I ended up driving over the top of Indiana, and I ended up staying all the way across Ohio and ended up staying in Youngstown, Ohio. And I sat in Youngstown, Ohio and watched this huge winter storm roll across me and about a foot and a half of snow on the ground there. And then on Monday morning, I took off. Roads were mostly plowed, mostly cleared, and I crossed the entire state of Pennsylvania, crossed New York, and headed all the way into Connecticut, where I grabbed the hotel, and then I headed over to record the podcast with Quite Frankly. So welcome anybody who's joining us from the Quite Frankly show. The Franklies, Peasants, welcome the Franklies. Franklies is the evening show. The Peasants are the morning show. So glad to have you guys. And I was very inspired by Frank. I loved his studio. We're going to do some things a little bit differently around here. I'll tell you, one thing about going to the Quite Frankly show and to see his great studio and his setup is we're close. We've got a lot of the same equipment. We've got a lot of the same tools. We're just not using them 100%. So we're going to try to clean up our act a little bit and be less of a gonzo podcast and try to up our production level a little bit. But man, what a great experience to go out with him. So thank you so much, Frank. And if anybody didn't catch the episode, it's the Quite Frankly show. You can find them pretty much anywhere, Rumble, YouTube, all of your audio podcasts. And it was the Monday show. So January 26th. Anyways, go take a listen to it. It was a J6 retrospective. We touched on things that are happening in Somalia. I thought it was a really good show. So it was kind of interesting. You peasants, you traveled with me, right? We kind of had a couple hit and miss episodes here and there. And it was amazing how many places you guys were reaching out to me and like telling me to stay safe in the weather and things like that. So I really appreciate it. That was a lot of fun to have you guys kind of, praying for me and stuff like that. The whole trip went off without a hitch. I was careful. I've gotten to the point where like it wasn't even worth driving in the snow. I could have driven across Pennsylvania like following a snowplow or something, but it wasn't worth it. So anyways, so thank you so much, you guys, for being patient for kind of the weird show schedule. We'll get back at our regular schedule here. I had probably a lot of highlights from my trip, But the thing that's fresh on my mind was last night flying back from Newark. I ended up flying out of Newark, New Jersey to fly a direct flight back to Seattle. It's a 6-hour flight, and which is incredible. It used to take like a year and a half, 2 years to cross the country. Now you can do it in a quarter of a day. It's incredible. I mean, anybody who doesn't think air travel is incredible is nuts. But I ended up sitting next to two Zoomerwaffens, right? So on my right-hand side was an 18-year-old who had been in New York for a week, kind of deciding if she wanted to move from Seattle area out to New York and live that life. And then there was another young lady who was a little bit older. I'm not sure her exact age, but I peg her somewhere around 30, couple years younger, maybe a couple years older. And anyways, she lives in New York. She's also from Seattle. She was returning home for the week. And anyways, she voted for Mondami. She is a New York Jew. She's very pro-Israel. We talked about that, the issue over in Palestine. I found it very, very interesting. One of the things that I've said on this podcast is we can't vote our way out of an indoctrinated society. And anytime I spend a significant amount of time with the Zoomerwaffens, I want to find out what they think, especially if they're on the left side. And I'll tell you, it was really interesting because it was like thing after thing. We had a great discussion. The whole thing started out about a discussion about a tattoo. I was in the middle seat, right? And I'm a big guy and I got these two ladies on either side. So I'm like sitting like this. And the whole discussion started out over messed up tattoos because the one gal had a tattoo that was in Arabic and she had another tattoo that was in Hebrew. And I thought, that's an interesting combination of languages to have. So anyways, we started talking about funny tattoos. And I shared a story about someone in prison that got a tattoo that was supposed to say country and it said county. And they'd forgotten the R. And anyways, it was like, where did that happen? And I was like, I don't hesitate to tell you guys, but it was when I was in prison. So then, of course, that opened up discussion about January 6th. And that's where we started talking about politics and Donald Trump. Our discussion was nonstop. It went for 6 straight hours. It centered around topics of immigration. It centered around topics of transgender rights and boys and girls sports, and talked about all kinds of different things. And it was really interesting talking to them because neither one of them have kids. And so when it came to the topic of, men and women's locker rooms, they were like, well, what if someone is transitioned and they're fully convinced in their head that they're a cis woman, a woman, they're trans woman, and they want to go to the women's locker room. And I mean, they're fully convinced, they're taking medication and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, how do you differentiate that from a pervert who just puts on some makeup and a wig and goes into a girl's locker room, who is thoroughly convincing when he talks to the police officers that he's a transgender woman? Where do you draw the line? Like, at what point can you make these distinctions? And then we talked about avoidance. I said, as a father with teenagers, despite my opinions or best efforts, right, biology is going to take its course. So there's a reason why I tell my teenage boys when he's out on a date with girls to be home by midnight, right? Because, hey, there might be temptation, but I promise you the opportunity for temptation is going to accelerate after midnight when you're a teenager. There's nothing good going on with the two sexes being together after midnight when you're teenagers. The risks are too high, despite your moral judgments, right? Life decisions can happen in a blink of an eye for you adults that, have kids that have come as a surprise. You know what I'm talking about. So point being, I'm like, so one of the things conservatives understand is the reality of the world. So we practice things like avoidance, like, hey, there's a reason why we don't want men in the women's locker room. It has nothing to do with your emotional status. It has to do with the mechanics. We don't want to allow these things together in the same place. It's a black or white issue in certain vulnerable spots. And they actually kind of came around a little bit to my understanding of that. And I was like, listen, number one thing we have to protect is kids. And, these mixed spaces are very dangerous spaces. Anyways, it was a great discussion. We talked about economics. I talked about how immigration plays into jobs. And the interesting thing was, it's not that they disagree with the desired policy outcomes or what we would do to fix certain problems, but there was a lot of emotions. They were pretty convinced that Donald Trump was guilty of rape. And it was like, whoa, the Eugene Carroll case. So we had to kind of talk about that. I found myself kind of experiencing this. I found this on X, and this was kind of my experience. And as we were talking, obviously we had no internet. So one of the things, as soon as we landed, we fact checked ourselves on a couple things, but this was kind of funny. So this is a guy. Let me see. How can I share this a little bit better? Okay. So darn it. that didn't work. All right, let me grab that slide again. Anyways, a guy says, this is America is getting unsafe, and he's like, I'm going to move, or I can't try. I'm canceling my trip to America. It looks like it's too unsafe. And someone replied, you live in Britain, and he goes, well, what about it? She says, there's a rape every 57 seconds. He goes, that's crazy. She goes, look it up. And then he looks it up and he goes, oh my gosh, that's a lot of rapes. It was like the things that you don't know, right? So we were talking about all these different topics, talking about fraud. It was fascinating how everything kind of, and they both agreed. The whole point of this is 2 + 2 has to equal 4. As soon as we can agree on that, now we can decide if we want to do the math equation to get to number 4, right? If that's even the objective of whatever our policy is. And it was interesting when they kind of saw it like that. It was like, okay, we have to see with clear eyes. And it was interesting because the Jewish gal that was sitting next to me, she clearly understood what it was at stake in the Middle East between Palestine and Israel and how Israel has governed itself. So while at one point she was very empathetic of immigration and all these things, she was also very cognizant that evil exists and people can have bad intentions and stuff like that. So for her, I could see some cognitive dissonance. I found it fascinating that she was so excited about Mandami. They called him their great new hope and stuff like that. It's really interesting. But they also admitted that, on any given day in New York, as they travel around via subway, they might see 3 or 4 or 5 people defecating openly. And it was like, but at the same time, you're so excited. It's interesting to me how the Mandami policies are doubling down on de Blasio policies and things like that. And there's this assumption that it's going to fix things. And it's like, well, it's not what fixed things. The last time New York was really a great safe city overall was under Giuliani, and he was absolutely cracking down on turnstile jumpers and public defecation and stuff like that. So, but again, Zoomerwaffens, they weren't around for that. They didn't see that. To them, that's just the chaos normalcy of a big city. And for older generation boomers, that to them, that's like a deterioration of the city. So the different world perspectives was really interesting. The other thing that happened in my discussion with them was we started talking about, obviously, is we talk about immigration, and that gets onto this topic of everything that's going on in Minnesota. And so another thing we discussed over and over again was, where do you get your news? And I was like, well, I try to go to primary sources. So one of the things that's been going on is, obviously, we've covered this pretty extensively day after day, is all this exposed Minnesota fraud. Their particular little niche of media and stuff that they consume is very headline oriented, and they don't, I don't know that they have a lot of great first-hand news sources. So for example, when we landed and we fact checked some stuff, for example, the 5-year-old that ICE detained they pulled over the father was an illegal, he took off running, so they split up. One officer stayed with the 5-year-old. So that's the story, that's the official story from DHS and everybody. Well, ABC News ran an article saying that statement was an abject lie, and I'm like, okay, so now we're in a position here where ABC says it's false, DHS says it's true. What are the stakes for ABC and DHS? ABC has no stakes. If ABC misreports, they just do that free speech cop-out, right? Which is fine. But then if DHS misreports, eventually there's going to be hearings and potentially impeachment. I'm like, if this is false, then Kristi Noem, whoever put out the statement, has to be fired. So there's consequences, right? Now, obviously, if there's no enforcement of the consequences, that's where you get into like designated liars and people who do spin tall tales, politicians specifically. But anyways, I showed him this clip of Mehmet Oz, and Mehmet Oz is a cabinet secretary. I made this point. He's Senate confirmed. So if he's misrepresenting grotesquely here, he could potentially be impeached. And I said, if this is a lie, he must be impeached. So I played them this clip, and they really didn't believe it was true. Like, actually didn't believe. They questioned it. Well, how do we know that's true? And when Mehmet Oz here talks about fraud, right, I am looking at this going, as someone who's followed the story, you've got these reporters who have gone out and have knocked on these doors, put it publicly. Obviously, the online paperwork, all the reporting on the Secretary of State and these different social welfare web pages have all shown, that these people are receiving payments. Well, now Mehmet Oz comes out and he wants to do a site visit to confirm that. Because one of the things that the news is saying is, like in this case, the state of California made a site visit annually and confirmed that these are good businesses or whatever. Well, okay, so that checks the box. But even if they did make a site visit, when Mehmet Oz, the guy who cuts the check with federal funds, goes out and shows up, okay, well, if the other guy checked on it, they did it incorrectly, right? So they couldn't really believe this because they're like, well, he's not showing documentation. I'm like, at this point in the story, the documentation's all there and it's been shown, and the documentation's all accurate. That's why nobody's been flagged for fraud. It's when you actually go out and make a real world knock on the door as a real person who's not just trying to check a box or, do his job for compliance, or has been told by some director, hey, yeah, I know there's not people in these buildings, but we just kind of look that over as long as the paperwork's good. So Mehmet Oz goes out there, does this. They questioned the truthfulness of this. Shocking to me.
So you can see these are medical buildings. They've got Cyrillic writing, Russian, Armenian writing. On both sides, there's lots of action, it seems. I don't know how many patients are getting care, but in this 4-block area in Los Angeles, there are 42 hospices. So either there are a lot of people dying here, or you've got a fraudulent activity that is so good that everyone wants to get in on it. I'm in Van Nuys in Los Angeles, and this boarded up area above my head here is...
Okay, so just so people have context, because I had to point this out to them, I said, this is hospice care. So this isn't like a daycare where kids may or may not be there. So that's like the plausible deniability. When you show up at a daycare and no one's there, it's like, well, all the kids are at school, or, nobody showed up today. They didn't have to be here, whatever, right? I get the plausible deniability. That's why you go back day after day and see if there's actually people there. So here, this is hospice care. So this is supposed to be like end of life care. These people should be in the building, laying in a hospital bed, surrounded by loved ones and nurses and medical equipment and things like that. This is hospice. This is not, an outpatient, outbound kind of situation here. So that's important to understand when they're looking at these buildings, that they should have medical activity happening.
A big hospice center. There are apparently quite a few hospices around here, 42 within a 4-block radius. And these guys stole $16 million. Listen carefully. The main guy went to jail for 2 years for stealing $16 million, which is a good trade-off for a lot of folks. And if you look at it, it's pretty in the script. There wasn't anyone really in there. They weren't doing any services. They just got an address they could claim was a hospice. And then they ran the business claiming people were at home getting services, which they really weren't. What we have learned is there's roughly $3.5 billion of fraud taking place here in Los Angeles in hospice and home care. It's run quite a bit of it by the Russian Armenian mafia. You notice the lettering and language behind me is of that dialect. And it also highlights the fact that this is an organized crime, mafia deal, where you've got folks who are systemically recruited doctors to write false prescriptions, hundreds of doctors participating. They've got 100,000 patients who they've tricked or paid to give them their beneficiary numbers so they can perpetuate the fraud. And then the criminals are just running the whole organization and quickly scurrying away when law enforcement does get around to prosecuting them. Unfortunately, in California, there has not been a lot of attention on these problems. That's going to change. The U.S. Attorney, the FBI, everyone's now focused on the fact that in this state, which has about $30 billion worth of home and community-based services, most of it might be fraudulent. Those are big numbers, and we're taking it seriously. The president's not going to tolerate this anymore.
Yeah, I think that's great. The president's not going to tolerate it anymore because we, the people, aren't going to tolerate it anymore. It's too much. And one of the things that came up with these Zoomerwaffens, and I invited them to listen to the podcast. I hope they make their way here. It would be really awesome to have them join the Peasants, because that was the thing I emphasized with them, is that we're all peasants. We have to live here, right? No matter what. I mean, even the immigrants have to live here. They're peasants. They're fodder in all of this. Some of the suffering they go through to get here is pretty extreme. Before we move on talking more about this, I want to take a moment to share with you about 1775 coffee. If you still haven't tried 1775 coffee, now's your shot. The starter kit just dropped, only 1,000 units. You're getting the bold dark roast that hits hard, the smooth medium roast, and the vitality mushroom coffee for clean energy and laser focus. No crash, a single origin, small batch, toxin-free and mold-free. Plus, you're getting a golden spoon clip, because freedom isn't scooped with plastic. A frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's opinions, or some Zoomerwaffens on the airplane. And a black 1775 tumbler, $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio and grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something just like Rumble does. Okay, so with that, let's go to the chats before we move on. So, Shantini, good morning. Carlitz, good morning, everyone. Douglas Wyatt, good morning, all. Carlitz, just realized you were back in your home studio. Glad you made it back safe. We're on the mainland again. Carlitz is one of our international, sometimes, listeners, in and out of the country all the time. Glad you're back too, Carlitz. Ponyboy, 2 years for 16 million. I'm doing this whole American dream wrong. I got to tell you something. One of the reasons why drug charges come with such high sentences is because people can do the math. If you're a serious drug dealer and you're pulling in millions of dollars, by the time you get caught, you might have got 5, 6, 7, 8 years under your belt, making tons of money, driving Land Rovers, big, nice house, cash everywhere, right? And then you get busted, you get 3 years in the slammer. Well, you divide the math, you kind of figure it out, and you're like, oh, I still did pretty well, even though I spent 3 years without any income. Wesley Snipes, who was put in prison on 3 misdemeanor tax charges that were run consecutive, so he spent 3 years in prison. He had to pay a $5 million penalty to the IRS for having evaded $27 million in taxes. So, take the delta of that money, divide by 3, and he still did pretty well, even though for those 3 years in prison. Wasn't worth it, but some people kind of think in those terms. So that's, one of the reasons why we have sometimes really high sentences for certain crimes, is because otherwise you can't create a deterrent because they're so profitable otherwise. And that's also what happens with these fraud charges. Someone steals a couple $1 million, and you do see ones, someone steals $16 million, they get 3 years in prison or something. But sometimes, a couple $1 million can result in like 10, 20-year sentences. And it has to do with trying to create deterrence, especially when there's profit on the line. Okay. On the Sean Ryan show, one of these investigative journalists was on there. And this is one of the things that I wish that I could have had these Zoomerwaffens listen to the podcast regularly, because my attempt is always to go to some type of primary source. And when it's punditry and stuff like that, we talk about it, right? Because remember, it's not just the facts, it's the narrative. So what people say about events matters. What people say about Donald Trump, for example, being guilty of sexual assault matters. It's not the facts. That's not the truth. That's not how it really broke down in court, but that was the intended effect. And I explained that to them. I said, the intended effect of that lawsuit was exactly what you guys just did. You both assumed the president of the United States was guilty of rape. And I said, that was it. That was the whole intended effect of how they did that, is here we are years later, and that came out of your mouth as if it was a statement of fact, right? So we always want to check ourselves. Well, this is one of those investigative journalists who actually went out and knocked on the doors, followed up the money, followed the paperwork, which led to all these other investigations. It wasn't just Nick Shirley. The thing about Nick Shirley is he didn't do the investigation. He did the journalism. The investigations were done by citizens who were just literally concerned, what's happening with our tax dollars? But these are the kind of numbers, and this is the kind of activity that they're doing. And this is what Mehmet Oz was following up on. Again, if we can all agree 2 + 2 is 4, is fraud wrong? Is fraud wrong? Does it matter if it's Armenians? The reason I played that Mehmet Oz clip is we're talking about Somali fraud, but there's also Armenian fraud and all these other immigrant groups. They're running like a mafia. Listen, the natural state of things is the family, right? And then there's the tribe. And what is a nation state? It's just a really big extended tribe, right? With diverse tribes that have unified under treaty. That's literally like what the actual breakdown of power and influence and all that ultimately boils down to. So for us, in a system where we're all working together, fraud is fraud. If it's happening by one of the little subculture tribes within the United States, the overarching compass, the overarching idea should be fraud is bad. Doesn't matter who's committing it. So we can call it Somali fraud because it's predominant in the Somali community, or we can call it Armenian fraud or whatever it is. It's okay to call it that. The Italian mafia. What are you saying? All Italians are in the mafia? No, I'm saying Italians have a mafia. Okay. It's like, that's what the point is. So as he goes through here, right, it doesn't matter the immigrant group. Fraud is fraud. Listen to these numbers.
39 companies in one building.
Yeah. And we actually have video of it that we'll release in conjunction with this episode. We went in, we knocked on all the doors, and nobody's home. They're one-room office suites. They all have matching signs on the door. They're checking the box of having an office so that they can unlock the Medicaid money.
Yeah.
But no one's there. And if somebody from the government just knocked on the door, they'd figure out pretty quickly, or just like did what we did, just walk around the building. We visited twice in December and then in January to see what was going on. And it's clear what's happening. They just like, someone figured out, here's this empty office building, go get a suite, you check the box, you unlock the Medicaid money, you look like a legitimate business. But you've got AB Home Healthcare, Bright Star Home Care, Bright Star LLC, Bright Star Residential, Bright Stars USA, Bishop Star Residential, Coastal Care LLC, Fable Home Care, Greater Portland Home Care. That one has billed $2 million. Maine Home Care, Noble Transportation, which is a Medicaid transportation company, Prestige Home Care. That one's billed $2.5 million. Knocked on the door, nobody's there. Southern Maine Home Care. That one is $4.3 million.
Wow. I mean, and it's number after number. He's going in Maine. It's happening in every state in the union. There's no doubt about it. So it's not necessarily that, all Somalis commit fraud, but it's like, well, a lot of Somalis are committing fraud. It's that simple. It was interesting. I kind of let myself go because I let myself go to talk to them. And I was like, can we talk clearly and openly? Like, can I say, what would in a normal political correct environment be racial slurs? And they were like, okay with that, which is kind of funny. Again, Zoomer Waffens. But I was like, listen, when we're talking about this stuff, we have to be able to call the spade the spade. We have to be able to look at things and say, illegal immigrants that are undocumented, you have to understand the path of how they got there. So I explained to them how this can kind of work. I said, imagine some small town in Illinois, Centralia. One of my cellmates was from Centralia, and he complained about how the town was bombed out. There were no jobs or anything like that, right? And what few jobs there were taken by immigrants. And one of the things he commented one time was because they don't do drugs, and that's why they can have a job at McDonald's or whatever. Okay, so that's really weird. But I said, think about this for a second. Someone wants to cross the southern border. We pretty much assume and know and understand that they have to pay the cartel to do that, right? So they pay the cartel to do that. So the cartel makes money. And then on top of that, usually there's an exchange. A lot of times these people that are crossing the border have to bring something with them, right? They're part of the smuggling operation. Wear this backpack, cross the border, drop it there. Okay, go meet up with Border Patrol, claim asylum. So that person crosses the border, bringing drugs with them, but they're in search of the American dream. They get put through the system, right? And as they're getting put through the system, those drugs make their way through the distribution networks all the way into Centralia, Illinois. And then some young man is getting ready the next day to go to his first job interview. And he goes out to some friend's house to party. And his friends, through peer pressure, encourage him to smoke meth for the first time. Meth that came out of that backpack that illegal immigrant crossing the border in search of the American dream brought across as an exchange to the cartel in order to cross the border. That illegal immigrant working through the system as that meth made its way to Illinois, where our young man going for his first job interview the next day gets pressured by his peers who have the availability of meth in their community in quantity, right, coming across the border, pressure him into taking. The next day he's spun out, he's high, he doesn't show up for his job interview. But that immigrant who brought the drugs across the border, wittingly, unwittingly, unknowingly, unintentionally, doesn't matter, makes his way through the system and gets dropped off by a bus from some organization that is distributing migrants across the country. He gets dropped off and he walks by that restaurant where that young man was going to go to that job interview, and he sees that help wanted sign in the door, and he walks in and he applies for the job and he gets it. That's what's happening when illegals cross the border in search of the American dream. And they're participating in that process, coming across the border with the cartels who are poisoning our children, who then don't get those jobs because of the drugs that come into our communities that they wouldn't have if the opportunity wasn't even there, right? That's one of the things as an adult with parents is one of the things you have to do with parenting is you have to stop the opportunity for evil and the opportunity for bad things to happen. As little children, we don't leave them in a room full of sharp knives laying around the floor, right? Even though we've taught them not to use the knives, it's not a good idea, right? Don't leave little kids around matches and kindling, right? When they don't understand the power of fire, right? It's not that all those things, that we don't want immigration to come in and take the jobs that Americans aren't filling, but we don't want to have immigrants coming in and taking the jobs that aren't being filled because Americans are strung out on drugs that those very immigrants brought across. And even if it isn't the same immigrant themselves, you understand how this is happening at scale. And that's essentially what has happened in so many of our American neighborhoods. And when those people get here, a lot of times they get supported by these networks of these mafias, the Armenians, the Turkish. We know that coming across the southern border under the Biden regime, there were 170 different nationalities that made their way through the different travel networks to Mexico and up through the border. And a lot of those people came because why? Because there's cartel and gang relationships that are established here in the United States that are in Armenia that are funneling people here. Why? Because they can make money, because they can, because that's human nature, right? Another discussion we had about these people was this idea of weaponizing your virtue, right? The idea that, hey, we're all supposed to have integrity, so we project that integrity onto everybody else. And that's what allows us to have these blind spots for swindlers. And it applies to everyone. It's not just the Armenians. It's not just the Somalians. It's not just these other groups. It could be our Congress people themselves. Tim Burkhart was on with Benny Johnson. And this was a really interesting interview because Tim Burkhart, right, is one of these like down to earth, really sincere politicians that seems to kind of have his stuff together. And he was on the committee with Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was on the Doge committee. She was the chair of the Doge committee. And they had an interview with this guy who's in charge of basically making all the payments for federal government buildings. And Tim Burkhart asked a question about, are we making payments or for leases on buildings for the federal government for buildings that are owned by members of Congress? Now, I'll point out here, because we'll listen to him say it. He mentions that Marjorie Taylor Greene was the committee chairman and that nothing happened to follow up with that question in her committee. Nothing happened. So remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene, right, for all the good she's done, and she's kind of a non-factor now, but this is the kind of stuff that would make Donald Trump and others kind of turn on her and go, maybe you drank a little bit of the swamp Kool-Aid. So let's listen to Tim Burkhart here discuss this with Benny Johnson. And again, it's not just these individual immigrant groups, it's fraud in general. Oops, I unshared the screen. We want to go after all fraud in all of its forms. Now, we can call this political fraud, just like we would say Somali fraud or Armenian fraud. So let's go. Here's some political fraud.
Marjorie Taylor Greene had us in there in a building that was basically empty. That was the people that were supposed to be overseeing our real estate. And I asked the question, are members of Congress owning real estate? And the guys that are being rented to the federal government in Washington, D.C. And the guy said, yeah, they are. And it stopped right there. Nothing. And that should have been the beginning of it. And that's where I'm going to be a little different. I'm going to be on the front end of it. It's not going to be sexy, and hopefully the screaming will be back and forth because that's just the nature of politics. But we're going to eliminate that, and we're going to eliminate the corruption that has infiltrated our committee system.
You are, as Doge chairman, going to pick up the ball and continue the work when it comes to what seems like a massive scandal, which are big federal buildings owned by members of Congress that are leased out to the federal government. I mean, private buildings owned by members of Congress, leased back to the federal government.
Yeah.
And so that's like the snake eating its tail, right?
That is the tip of the iceberg. That just shows you my frustration with this thing. I mean, anywhere you look, we've got to not be the shotgun approach, because that's where we'll be neutralized. We got to focus in on just a few things. The first thing, I think we'll have something around IRS time. What's the big complaint with the IRS, outside of the fact they're stealing your money, is that you can't ever get to them. Their technology is not intermingled. I found out that through government duplication, I've got a chart. It's just the craziest looking thing. And it shows, and my staff has uncovered basically over $1 trillion of just simple duplication within these departments that nobody is willing to tackle. It's not sexy, but we're going to tackle it. And we're going to show it to the American public, and hopefully they'll back us when we go to change the structure of government. And that is the tip of the iceberg. That just shows you my frustration with this thing. I mean, anywhere you look, we've got to not be the shotgun approach, because that's where we'll be neutralized. We got to focus in on just a few things. The first thing, I think we'll have something around IRS time.
All right, looks like it repeats itself there. So what he's saying is the IRS, their whole database is not intermingled with the rest of the government's database. So someone at DHS can't look up your tax return, right? They have to actually like subpoena and do that whole process. So that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? We want the IRS to be walled off. It has all of our sensitive financial data and stuff like that. And yes, they have all of your transactions. Like even if you have bank accounts that they're not supposed to be looking at, like non-interest bearing accounts. They're looking. So that makes sense. But what he's also saying is that there's duplication in the system, double payments being made, which is just another element of fraud, right? So they're going to dig down into that. I love hearing that. Tim Burkhart seems to be a real down to earth, get to business kind of guy. He's constantly talking about, all the different nonsense that happens with, everything. Okay. Now, I want to move on topics here, because one of the things that I wish so deeply that I could have shown these things to the Zoomerwaffens. I did show them the clip that I shared with you guys yesterday when I was broadcasting from Connecticut, which was Benny Johnson, where he talked about Ilhan Omar and her current husband's winery that was worth, $15,000 and then $1 million. And now it's worth like $15 million. And they've only ever produced one line of wine, or even maybe one bottle of wine, called The Devil's Lie, right? So I showed him that, and I showed, look, he's got the documentation. He's on the websites. He's showing all the filings. So yesterday, something really incredible happened. Take a listen to this. So this is Cam Higbee, and he's reporting on this report from Benny Johnson. So Benny Johnson had this report. Mario Nawfal, who is 2.8 million followers. He's really he's got the largest show on X. He's a good source. He's podcaster, pundit like us, but he gets good sourcing and things like that. I like what he's got to say. And so he shows this video of Benny Johnson, which we watched yesterday. Okay, with the financial disclosures and everything. Well, Cam Higbee on Newsmax, right, followed up with it yesterday. Something pretty incredible happened. Now, I understand how this works. I saw in my own case with January 6th, the Department of Justice put tweets up on the screen for the jury to look at that had a vanity name that I didn't recognize, that they got up off the Wayback Machine. How they created that, what it said, totally unverifiable to me. Had I seen that and known that they were going to use that earlier, and if I was actually arguing my case, I would have said, I don't think that's really my account. You can't actually connect that to me. So they just kind of did it knowing that I couldn't challenge it. And they were some of the most damning, quote unquote, tweets about my planning to go storm the Capitol. And it was like, but why is that? None of my vanity names have ever had an underscore in it. That vanity name was Peasant Pod _ I've never had that. My vanity name was Peasant Pod, which they showed other tweets where they got those and they got them through subpoena from X. But then that account, they got just off the Wayback Machine from a Google search. Go figure. So the internet is very manipulatable. And we've seen things happen, like the disappearance of Eric Chiaramella's name. We've seen the power that they have to basically make things on the internet disappear when it's coming from the government side. It's difficult for me to do. The government seems to be able to pull it off. So this is what Cam Higbee is explaining. The follow-up to this, what about Ilhan Omar's winery? How's that going?
Another major asset she listed in her financial disclosure is this winery. What does a Somali know about wineryism? Okay, that was in 2023. That was worth, according to Ilhan Omar's own financial disclosure form, between $15,000 and $50,000. But on her financial affidavit from a year later, that same winery was listed at a value of between $1 and $5 million. Just real quick. Why does a Muslim own an alcohol company? I thought that wasn't a thing in Islam. Anyway, it gets weirder. Up until yesterday, Benny Johnson was able to find their supposed inventory bottles and all the things they had, their office location, and a bunch of other information on the business. But as of today, those sites are totally shut down, and any mention of their website has been wiped off the internet. I'm talking gone. The Wayback Machine, all these other crafty little archive sites, everything is gone. Like deleted the root service. I called my computer buddy, Jim. He couldn't even find it. It was some fancy AR jargon bot machine for recovery. I don't even know, he was explaining it to me. He couldn't even find it, which is weird that a company that boasted an award-winning wine, the quote, double gold winner in 2022 San Fran Chronicle competition with a corporate value of up to $5 million would just vanish into thin air. They didn't sell it. Is it possible for this to be a functioning business and have absolutely no footprint, wiped from the internet, go from 1,000 net worth to 5 million in less than a year?
Well, no other winery on earth's done that, Carl. Anybody knows anything about this knows that the wine industry is under enormous pressure. Wineries, there's people pulling up vineyards and closing wineries, including some very well-known ones. People are drinking less wine. The economy is weighed on that in favor of cheaper alcohol options. So the wine industry has been in mad contraction for quite some time now. But more to the point, you have to have a federal license to have an alcohol facility. Where is her winery on the TTB website? That's right. The federal regulatory body that does this. So no, this doesn't exist, and it's a phantasm that the idea you can have a winery increase in value. Everybody else in the wine business knows better.
Yeah.
He loves the Constitution.
So how in the world did all of that stuff disappear? Now, you guys, this story gets even more interesting. This all happened in a period of 48 hours, the breaking of this wine story. And what I'm going to share with you next is going to blow your mind. But before I share it with you, I need to tell you a little bit about Rumble Premium. As you guys know, we do a premium show. After the show, we have the unoffendables that stick around, and we switch into the private mode. And if you want to participate with us on that end, you need to be a Rumble Premium subscriber. You've probably noticed Rumble is growing fast, and it's not slowing down. They're building a real alternative to big tech that puts creators first and actually protects free speech. And now there's Rumble Premium, an easy way to upgrade your experience with Premium and get ad-free viewing across the platform. No pre-rolls, no interruption, just the content you came for. Plus, Premium members unlock exclusive content like bonus videos, behind-the-scenes drops, and more from your favorite creators like me. Right now, Rumble is offering $10 off an annual subscription. Go to rumble.com/premium and use the promo code STUDIO at checkout. That's rumble.com/premium, promo code STUDIO. No ads, more freedom, and content you actually care about. That's the deal. All right. One of the things I love about Rumble is this platform that they allow us to stream on. And it gives me great access to you guys. I get to see your chats, which, by the way, we've got a lot of people listening today across all the platforms. This is one of the highest running total of listener shows that I've had. I've got listeners on Facebook, X, YouTube, Rumble. If you're listening on Rumble or YouTube, one of the great things about Rumble is it allows me, the content creator, to see your comments in one place. So please, those of you listening on Rumble and YouTube, put your comments in the live chat. I always do see them. I very much try to read them all before the end of the show, until we get to the point where we have more chats than we can read. I was very inspired by, quite frankly, show this last week and how he goes to his audience. I want to do so many of those same things, call-ins, all that kind of stuff. But all of that starts with participation. So please, please, please comment, share, chat, post your opinions, and we'll get to them as best as we can. Okay, so Ilhan Omar's entire winery just disappeared from all online records. Everything, the government paper stuff, the website, all of it disappeared yesterday. At the same time this was going on, Ilhan Omar was giving a speech, and she was sprayed with an unknown substance. So let's watch the video. Okay, here it is. So she's giving her speech.
I don't know. Oh my God, he sprayed something on her. I need a napkin to know nothing.
Notice the live chats. Who cares? Fake like her tax return. Who cares?
Continue. These fucking assholes are not going to get away with it.
Okay, so some man walked up to her, sprayed her with some unknown liquid in a bottle, right? And then she goes and charged at him, that you guys saw there. So that happened. Right as she called for Kristi Noem's resignation, that man stood up, sprayed her, and that man is in a lot of trouble. He was arrested instantly. He's going to get prosecuted with like Tier 3 charges or something like that. I mean, it's a big deal. Like, what he did was, you cannot do that. You cannot do that, folks. You cannot walk up to a politician and spray them with something. How do you know it wasn't acid? How do you know it wasn't something, very, very bad and nefarious? So on the same day that all that stuff about her winery and what potentially could be this big, fat open door to the biggest shell corporation winery ever, that's been, that's probably where she accepts her bribe donations. I mean, the allegations and the potentialities with that are massive. Off the internet. Then she goes to give a speech, and she gets sprayed down with this bottle of whatever it was. I can't say water. Now, here's the real tell to this. She stood there, she took it, right? And then afterwards, she continued her speech. How do you know it wasn't acid? How do you know it wasn't some toxic chemical or something like that? She continued her speech. Then she went out into the hallway, and I'm a victim. I can't believe this happened, but I won't be deterred. Okay, well, let's look at this. The guy who sprayed her, and we don't even need to really show his mugshot or anything. It doesn't matter. We're going to show a couple pictures of him in a second. The guy who sprayed her, she's already being painted out to be a right-winger, white man, blah, blah, blah. If you think Ilhan Omar's attack was legit, you might have an IQ of a Somali. This has come from George at BZ Tweets. Guy who is planning to spray her with some unknown substance conveniently sits on the front row. Okay. Waits for the moment she attacks ICE and Kristi Noem, then sprays. Ilhan Omar chases him instead of ducking like a normal person, especially women, when attacked. Cameras conveniently ready to take the 4K images of the perpetrator. Ilhan Omar then defies her security to finish her dumb and unimportant speech. She proceeds to make herself out to be a champion who survived a political attack. Yeah, totally real. So Donald Trump got asked about this, and he just goes, she probably had herself attacked. He literally just blew it off like that. Turns out this is the guy. His name is Andy Kazmarek-Zak. It's this gentleman, right? Oh, nope, I'm not sharing the screen with you guys. Let's see. We got a couple things here. It says he probably heard the nurses yesterday saying they could spray people with dastardly chemicals. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so this comes from at C3. It says, well. So this is the gentleman right here. This man, not the kids. This man or this man right here. The alleged Omar sprayer, Andy Kazmarek, I don't know how to say the last name, seems to have some far left gender pronoun children. But yeah, totally MAGA. This stinks of being staged. There are 30 million reasons why. So here's the pictures. These are his kids. They're all gender whatever stuff going on there. Okay, so not MAGA, not what's going on there, but that's what the media wants you to believe with all this. It's interesting. All that happens, right? And the left is taking this like it's this massive attack. She's getting like martyr status, all that kind of stuff. But the timeline of the events there and who did it and the whole scenario just kind of screams out setup. So keep in mind, as the media today is telling you that, she's a victim of right-wing extreme violence or something like that, that those same people are the same people who tried to tell you that this
something that said, take a look at what happened.
The same people who said that was fake are going to tell you that what Ilhan Omar just went through was real on the same day as her specific brand of fraud and corruption. The how she probably makes her money, right, is exposed by Benny Johnson and then gets deleted. That same day, she goes from being fraudster to martyr and victim. Hello? Can you not see what's happening here? Right now, even if we give them the premise and we say, oh, hey, it's organic. It just happened. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible it just happened, because even Tim Walz is getting the ire of the left right now. Tim Walz obviously had a little stand down with Donald Trump. People are trying to portray it like Tim Walz, got Trump to back down and change plans. I don't think that's the case. If anything, I think Trump put Tim Walz kind of in checkmate. And we'll hear from Glenn Beck here in a second, his assessment of that. But this is Tim Walz in his office being protested at by the people who have been out protesting ICE are now protesting Tim Walz for caving into Donald Trump.
Justice denied! Justice delayed! Justice denied!
So those are the protesters that have been protesting ICE in the name of Renee Good and whatever pretty good, the two of them, literally pretty and good, right? Pretty good. They are now turning in on Tim Walz. And pretty interesting. Okay, so here's what Glenn Beck thinks going on over here with this situation in Minnesota, specifically with the Somali fraud there, right? Donald Trump had a phone call with Tim Walz and with Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis. And allegedly it was a decent phone call, and they've agreed to allow ICE into the jails to do their job, and then there won't be these street patrols, right? They've come to some kind of détente in that effect, which, by the way, is exactly what Donald Trump wanted in the first place. The only reason they're doing street patrols is because you're not letting them in the jails where the local officers can pick them up for DUIs and things like that, take them to the jail, then they can be taken into custody without incidents. So Donald Trump has basically achieved the outcome that he wanted to have happen, and had it been happening in the first place, wouldn't have had to deploy ICE into those neighborhoods. He's achieved that very outcome, which is in reality the win. Okay, so now it's the narrative. Facts, Trump won. Trump got exactly what he wanted out of that, which is why Tim Walz is being protested, because anybody who actually understands this issue knows that if they can go to the jails, the net effect is going to be the same. They're going to deport all the troublemakers. Okay, that's one thing. So they know that. That's why they're targeting Tim Walz now. But at the same time, it's a brilliant move that Trump has done, because he's put them in this like checkmate position. And that's what Glenn Beck is explaining here. So let's listen to Glenn Beck explain this for just a couple minutes of his kind of monologue on this, because it's, I think it's really relevant.
Nice. And I don't think it is. It is if you are reacting emotionally. And I want to say this. I could be wrong on this, so I don't mean to belittle you or have you think that I'm smarter than you, because I can guarantee you I'm not in almost all but Al Gore's case. I'm not smarter than you. I just look at things differently, and I could be wrong, but I'll give you a lens to see this through, and then a chart on how we're going to know whether it is it is a white flag or not. Okay. And I don't think it is a white flag. If you're looking at this through the lens of traditional political or cable news, you're going to look at this and say, this is a retreat. However, if you look at it as a counterinsurgency, if you look at it through that lens of counterinsurgency, federalism, and an optics war lens, then it's different. We're seeing Trump shift the battlefield, not abandon it. And let me take you through this cleanly and tactically here. First, what would a surrender or a blink actually look like? If Trump was blinking, this is what would happen. He would end the enforcement nationwide. He would call off ICE operations. He would publicly repudiate Homan or Miller. He would admit wrongdoing or illegality, and he would accept the Gestapo snatching people off the streets narrative. None of that happened. Instead, and now think of him in Art of the Deal, he narrowed the enforcement criteria. Political pressure is rerouted. Optics cooled. Legal authority preserved. Responsibility transferred back to the states. This is not a surrender. I believe this is a reframing of the fight, and it's really smart. If this is what it is, it's really smart. The strategic objective here that I think most people are going to miss is, what was the enforcement criteria? Was it to go scoop up every illegal on the streets? Was it to send everybody who came here, to send them home? Is that what ICE was doing? Because it wasn't. Because I remember when he said it, I'm like, what? We should be sending everybody that was here home. And he said, no. The goal here is to get the really bad criminals off the streets. That's what he wanted. So the goal was never ICE agents everywhere all the time. The goal was this: force blue state leadership to choose publicly and unmistakably between protecting violent criminals or cooperating with federal law enforcement. Okay, that's what he's been saying the whole thing. How are you people defending this? These are rapists in your community. So what Trump has just done is he has separated into three groups. One, the violent criminal illegals, easily moral. Everybody's for that. Okay. Two, the local state officials who shield them. There's another group. And three, the protest movements trying to provoke a legitimacy crisis. So he's now broken those three up. Minnesota was sliding towards a designed confrontation, street chaos, viral clips, allegations of federal overreach. The Senate Dems were threatening a shutdown. The media was building an authoritarian. We were headed towards everything that there's no way out, okay? And that environment only benefits one side, and it isn't the Trump side. It's not our side. The only thing he could have done was escalate. And do you think that's what they didn't want? That's exactly what they wanted. So he changed the terrain. He also, and this is telling to me, he also went and relieved the U.S. Border Patrol commander, Gregory Bovino. So this was part of it that really bothered me, okay? Because it's the hardest part emotionally. Here's a guy who was very, very clear on things, but it is the clearest tactically. Bovino was a guy who was saying, I mean, he even said something that was absolutely wrong this weekend. You don't have a right to carry a gun at a protest. No, you don't have a right to interfere with police. Once you engage with police and you're carrying a gun, then that's a different story. But he said a lot of things. He was defending some things that I thought were a little indefensible. But he was a lightning rod. He was a walking headline. He was a pretext for the Senate Democrats. I mean, he was a symbol. Whether it was fair or not, doesn't matter. Perception is reality. He was rogue federal officer escalating online while operating in a blue city. That's poison if you're in an optics war. And every war must worry about optics. If you're going to win, you have to worry about optics. So what
do I say? It's not the facts, it's the narratives, right? Optics matter.
What does Trump do? He rotates that guy out. Well, now the Senate shutdown talks, that weakens that. How are you going to shut down? He's giving, right? The media narratives loses the villain. The Department of Homeland Security regains message discipline, and the fight moves from personality back to policy. This is classic Trump. What does Trump say in Art of the Deal? And we've seen him do it over and over and over again. Never die on someone else's hill. If it isn't the hill you chose, don't die on a hill they're choosing. Only die on the hill you choose.
What great advice. So that is an excellent breakdown of how Trump checkmated Jacob Fry and Tim Walz. So yes, like exactly what Glenn Beck is saying. If you're mainly just getting the mainstream cable news, this looks like a retreat. But objectively, strategically, we are in an insurgency. He changed the terrain, right? He chopped their legs off because now they're in a position in order for them to look like they were trying to de-escalate and give Trump the lose to get ICE off the street. The bargaining chip that Trump forced them to come to the table with is putting people that are in jail illegally the ability for ICE to be able to come and pick them up. What a good move. And again, Trump, I didn't see that coming. I've been kind of like, this only goes up. Again, even Glenn Beck mentioned that the only way to go was up, 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 which was my concern, right? Once you go insurrection, now you've opened this can of worms and you've become the thing they've accused you of becoming, a tyrant. Right now, they backed you into that corner. So Trump, jujitsu to him, shifted out of their way. Why could he do that? Because at the core of all of this, there is the law. Way back in 2013, Joe Biden was asked, why can't the president just stop deporting people? And he said he can't do that. It'd be against the law. Oh, sometimes I forget to share the screen. I have to click like 5 things before I can hit play. Sometimes it gets a little tricky.
Where does POTUS get authority to suspend deportations of illegal aliens without going through Congress?
Okay, so that is what the left has been wanting. Look, all the way back in 2013, they've been wanting to suspend deportations. And Joe Biden gives the correct answer here.
He doesn't have the authority to do that. And as Cecilia said, what I get all the time and what she gets and you probably get is, well, look, why don't, since the system is broken, the Congress won't fix this, why don't you just suspend everything? The president does not have the authority to do that. In the first 100 days of my administration, no one no one will be deported at all. From that point on, the only deportations that will take place are commissions of felonies in the United States of America.
So to be clear, only felons get deported and everyone else gets to stay?
Yes.
That is where we saw Joe Biden really violate what he knew was the law. He did not have the authority to open the border and not deport people, but he did it anyways because power is power. But back in 2013, when the Democrats were still running a same agenda and Barack Obama was talking about not wanting to have the open border because it competes with American jobs, you know, the things we all believe, they knew that they didn't have the lawful authority to just stop deportations. They did it anyways. That's why Alejandro Mayorkas got held in contempt of Congress, right? Was it contempt? No, they impeached him, and then the Senate didn't take it up. They actually impeached him over just this very thing because he was an open violation of the law. Jacob Fry, who had a conversation with Donald Trump and had conceded on all these points to let ICE into the jails and stuff like that, made some statements about how ICE isn't coming into the jails. Basically, the exact opposite of what they'd said before. Jacob Frey made some statements as to that they're not going to let ICE into the jails. Now, remember, this is with the backdrop of ICE protesters in Tim Walz's office protesting that I showed you. So Jacob Frey might have made that statement to make sure that their next stop wasn't the city hall where the mayor's office is, right? So he's trying to divert the mob, but he makes the statements acting like ICE isn't going to be picking people up out of the jail. So Donald Trump posted this. Surprisingly, Mayor Jacob Frey just stated that Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws. This is after having a good conversation with him. Could somebody in his inner sanctum please explain that this statement is a very serious violation of the law and that he is playing with fire? Just like what Joe Biden said there, they can't prevent this. The law says ICE is supposed to pick up criminals who have detainers. And if you're here illegally and you have a DUI, you will get deported. That's the whole point. That's the moment when it's easy to pick you up. You came here illegally. We're not hunting you down, right? We have this laissez-faire belief that if everybody can just get along, we'll be fine. This is America, the land of the immigrants, blah, blah, blah. But if you're here illegally and you violate our laws, DUI, assault, battery, theft, doesn't matter. Felonious mopery, right? If you get charged with felonious mopery and you're not supposed to be here, you're going to do your time for the crime and back home you go. Not a complicated scenario. It's the law. So Jacob Fry saying they're not going to do that. That's the genesis of all the cops in the street. The only reason your communities are being encroached upon is because you're not letting one or two ICE officers go pick up someone in a controlled environment that has already been captured. Instead, they're having to bring troops of people to go chase down one guy. And yes, the optics look bad, but they're following the law. But it doesn't matter when your objective is to break the law, when your objective is to crash the system. The idea is not to follow the law. It's the idea to create something new, to create a new norm. There's a definition in the dictionary of custom. Custom becomes the law. The way we do things matter. It actually has the ability to be enforced even without the parchment, right? Custom is the law. Hidden to the chats, Ponyboy says, Ilhan Smollett. I saw that a little while ago, Pony, and I wanted to fit that in. That is freaking hilarious. I'm going to start calling her that. Ilhan Smollett. That is so funny. And Marizo, he probably, I already read that one. I already heard about that, nurses. Okay, and before we go any farther, I want to take one more quick moment and share with you guys about my gold guy. As you know, I'm a huge precious metals fan. I was talking yesterday about copper, and by the way, I'm going to reply to your email. I was traveling all day yesterday. If you've been paying attention to the direction this country is headed, you already know our financial system is being intentionally sabotaged. Inflation is not a mistake. It's draining your savings while the political elites consolidate power. Every time Washington prints another mountain of cash, your dollar becomes weaker and your future becomes more vulnerable. This is exactly why you need to go to mygoldguy.com/rumble and get in touch with My Gold Guy. He isn't the big name gold companies that bait people with, quote, free gold or silver coins while quietly inflating the prices. That is deceptions disguised as generosity. My Gold Guy refuses to play that game. He is a no-frills, America-first precious metals dealer whose mission is simple: give you the best possible price so you can protect your wealth without the gimmicks and without the smoke and mirrors. Go to mygoldguy.com Rumble. Fill out the short form and request your complimentary consultation. He will give you real information about the economy, the instability ahead, and how physical gold and silver can anchor your future when everything else starts shaking. I know one of the biggest blessings in my life was being on a silver standard this year. It's done really well for me. And when you sign up, you'll get free gold and silver guide, which every American who cares about financial security needs to read right now. Do not wait. Do not assume things will work out themselves. Protect what is yours. Visit mygoldguide.com/rumble today and get your consultation and get the guide. This is the time to act. I encourage everybody in any way, shape, or form to get involved in precious metals. They are the best. They are the future. And as we said yesterday, gold is for the kings, silver for the gentlemen, and copper for the peasants, right? I'm going to look into copper and see what we can do there. I think it's going to be a fun ride. I'm looking forward to a lot of the future things that are happening. I think that we're rewriting history right now. So, and that was one of the things that my Zoomerwaffen friends agreed with. When we made the statement, the world order is being redone, there was no disputing. None. And when I mentioned my concept of the buses will be free, whether it's because conservatives are sick and tired for paying for other people to get services while they pay, or whether it's in their scenario where they just collectivize everything and everything's free. They were actually talking about like the free grocery stores that were going to be in New York. Thought that was interesting. I was like, well, I don't know that the farmers are going to grow food for free, but good luck with that. But anyways, they agreed the buses will be free. There's certain things that just are not going to be tolerated in this new world order, whether you like it or not. Now, the question is, are we going to have a one world order, or are we going to have a multipolar world order? Okay, so Donald Trump also today is warning Iran. Now, apparently it's been pretty well sourced and confirmed that Iran killed somewhere around 35 to 38,000 protesters in about a 48-hour period, which is specifically what Donald Trump warned them against doing. So this morning, Donald Trump put this out. He said, a massive armada is heading to Iran, and we've known this has been happening for a while. It is moving quickly with great power, enthusiasm, and purpose. It is a larger fleet headed by the great aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, then that's, let me reread that. Headed by the great aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, then that sent to Venezuela. Like with Venezuela, it is ready, willing, and able to rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence if necessary. Hopefully, Iran will quickly, quote, come to the table and negotiate a fair and equitable deal. No nuclear weapons. One that is good for all parties. Time is running out. It is truly of the essence. As I told Iran once before, make a deal. They didn't. And there was Operation Midnight Hammer, a major destruction of Iran. The next attack will be far worse. Don't make that happen again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump. Perilous times, folks, perilous times. Obviously, we've been supporters of what happened in Venezuela, and there's a real possibility that this is kind of unavoidable with Iran. They are hand in glove. They've worked together, and, it's a rogue regime. They have very little real allies around the world, and they killed 38,000 of their own people. This is an unacceptable activity for any legitimate, state, and I would never justify foreign intervention or foreign occupation on the guise of keeping the peace in their internal politics. I believe in sovereign states, and I don't believe that we should spend our blood and treasure running around the world looking for every monster to slay. But Iran, Venezuela, North Korea on occasion, these can be real, true existential threats to the American way of life. And I have a right to defend myself, and our country has a right to defend itself. This is one of the things that my Jewish Zoomerwaffen friend yesterday was very clear about. Israel has a right to defend itself. I have a right to defend my culture. And that was one of the things I made the point to them. I said, if immigrants don't assimilate, I have a right to defend my culture, right? I have a right to ask for them to assimilate. And they eventually kind of conceded the point. I mean, it's not always like you agree wholeheartedly. It's you agree to see from the other person's perspective, right? Yes, if I had your variables, I would see that that's reasonable. That's rational. There's a logic to your thinking. We can disagree. That's great. We can agree to disagree, right? But that was conceded. We have a right to self-defense, both personally and as a nation. And so we can openly say when there's these immigrant populations that don't assimilate, when they come over in the form of a mob, a gang, a tribe, and they then infiltrate our systems and grift money and two-tiered systems of justice and all the things that come along with that, we have a right to be a little bit sensitive about it. Iran's a part of all of this. Iran has been facilitating money coming across the border. Iran is an existential threat to our nation. Iran has sent his squads around. Iran does hacking. They do all the nefarious things. And they're not shy about it in any way, shape, or form. They literally chant death to America. Like, it's a real thing that's happening over there. So I don't know. Is this a regime change? One thing that I am confident about at this point with Donald Trump, but this would not be a protracted thing. If we act in Venezuela or in Iran, it'll likely be similar to how they did it in Venezuela. Now, this is a powerful tool. This ability to go in and extract sovereign leaders from other countries. It's a powerful tool. Cuidado, it's a word in Portuguese. It basically means be careful, but it has a little bit more sentiment in it's like, be careful of everything. Cuidado. Like, this is a perilous times. So hopefully they come to the table and they negotiate. I do think that that's what Trump wants, and he's putting the word out there, but man, tricky stuff. Okay, let's check the time here. Okay, it is about time for me to roll over into the private. I do have quite a bit of stuff I want to cover in the private, and I need to do it in the private because I got to rack up some of the private hours. Thank you very much, Rumble, for giving me goals to meet. Let me give you a preview of what I'm going to be talking about in the private side of things. We're going to be talking about Stephen Miller. He's been attacked in public. We're going to be hearing a little bit about Lindsey Graham and one of his predictions about Stephen Miller. We're going to be hearing from Secretary Scott Bessent about some of the real hard financial data and things that are happening that he believes is setting 2026 up not only to be a record economic year, but a really good year leading into the midterms. And then we're going to be hearing from another financial analysis on CNN that has to concede the same point, that all signs in the economy look good. One of the things that was really disheartening for me was this last week, as I drove across the upper Midwest, I was seeing gas prices in the low $2. I think the lowest I paid was like $2.37. That's pretty cheap. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen $2 gas. And then when I got home last night, I was driving home. It was like still $3.89 here where I'm at. So go figure. Washington State's just taking more and more of our money. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of the financial data. We are also going to be talking about something that is absolutely incredible. Actually, I might even talk about this before we actually sign off. Bigfoot on a military base. Yep, you heard it right here, folks. We're also going to be talking about elections, and one of the problems with all of this fraud centers around elections, right? We know that. That's like a conceded point here on the Peasants' perspective. But we kind of have to remind ourselves about it over and over again. We're going to be talking about, again, some more of the financial data and impacts and how it is helping us. And then we are going to do a really great first ever 12-hour news recap. So Mario Nawfal did a great 12-hour news recap. We're going to go over that because for all the traveling I've done and the limited show time I've had, I thought this was a good way to kind of wrap up what's happened this week. So we'll be doing that over on private. If you're a Rumble Premium subscriber, you can join us there. Please do. So with that, let me share with you guys, just because it's such an interesting little story here. But Matt Moneymaker of the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, who had the show on Discovery Channel about finding Bigfoot. It's called Finding Bigfoot. He interviewed some Marines. Now, this event happened 20 years ago, but there were multiple witnesses. Marines in a restricted military training area on Quantico Marine Base report seeing a Bigfoot. So there were multiple Marines. They were out on a patrol. This was all a mock simulated patrol. And I guess they had some issues with their compasses. They ended up kind of going in a big circle, but eventually they ended up seeing the Bigfoot. Let me read the length here. So Matt Moneymaker says he's credible. So it says here, the creature appeared to be pulling two trees together. The hair was brown and reddish-brown color. I could not determine whether it had climbed the tree or was already in it, but it was clearly manipulating both trees with great strength. These are not small trees. The creature is more than 8 feet tall with a large body and movements that didn't resemble that of a person. The three, after initially freezing, took off running. As we ran, we heard the very heavy thud and then fast-moving pursuit behind us. There was a loud crashing and breaking sounds, like something large moving rapidly through the dense brush. This continued for approximately 20 to 30 seconds, he said. At that point, I yelled to the Marine in the front to turn on his light so we could move as fast as possible without falling. We turned on our lights and ran at full speed in the general direction of where we believed the road and pickup point were no longer using our compasses. I remember growing up hearing my dad tell stories of basic training and doing training out in the woods, and stuff like that. I could just see them out there. Why is our compass taking us in circles? And then all of a sudden there's Bigfoot. Oh my goodness. Anyways, it's an old event, but it was these credible Marines that have stuck with this story for a long time, and they shared it with Matt Moneymaker. So that is pretty hilarious. Love it so much. Okay, I've got one more agenda item I need to take care of before I sign off into the subscription only private side. I need to send you guys off to some friends. Yes, for those of you that won't be joining us on that side, I'm going to send you guys over. Let's see. It looks like, who are we going to raid? Oh, let's go to vlog. I can never say this guy's name. I feel so bad. We've got a friend over here that has looks like his show just started. So we are going to go over and we are going to raid. What's going on here? Why can't I? This is a live show, folks. Sometimes I gotta show you how the sausage is made. That means pausing for just a moment so I can get this thing all set up for you guys. Okay, for those of you in the chat, especially the regulars, you know the drill. It is raid time. So let's see if I can get this right. Did it work? No, okay. I want to do all. Let's see. There's like a whole way to do this that Ron knows that I don't know. I have to do like pop-out chat or something. If it doesn't work in the next couple seconds, guys, I'll give you a pass, and maybe I don't know how to do this correctly. It's always a possibility. All right, it ain't working. We'll do it tomorrow. We got one more raid we need to do for the month. And so anyways, there you go. All right, guys, that's it for me. I am going to be going into the private mode for the premium listeners only, and we're going to be covering quite a bit of ground. So if you can, I look forward to seeing you there. For all the great new listeners, please don't forget to go find me on X, Gone 4 Months. TJ6 is my name out there. You can find us obviously here. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. YouTube, Facebook, X, everybody make your way over to Rumble, subscribe. Make your way onto Facebook, subscribe. Any audio podcast app will play our show. We're ubiquitous everywhere, The Peasants Perspective. Please go follow and do me a big favor. Download every episode and then delete them later. But I get credit for the downloads. All right, you guys, thank you so much. We will talk to you again tomorrow, and hopefully Ron will be joining us. Talk to you again. Bye.